This is one of the very strange distinctives of what we're presenting here. And so it's actually the opposite of what you're going to find in, I would say, most ministries and most churches. If you were to go to most ministries and churches and say, who is your ideal staff member? Is it somebody who's full time or somebody who's bivocational and part time? Most ministries, most churches would really say, look, if you're not full time here, you need not apply. Like that. That's an essential part of what it means to be on staff. There might be a position for you part time, but these key positions in the organization, they're really full time positions. And so we just completely reject and resist that whole idea. And like Chris said, we're coming at this from a completely different perspective, and that is that there's all kinds of reasons why we want all of our fathers and all of our households to be asset builders. And this is not a call to all be entrepreneurs. This is a huge misunderstanding because we have this idea that we're all somehow, like careerists who are choosing various careers, and entrepreneurship is one of hundreds of possible career paths. That's not a framing we even recognize as really relevant to this conversation. Everyone 150 years ago had a ambition to own assets, own land, right? This is what really built the new world. The turn of to the 20th century, from the 19th to 20th century, 70% of Americans lived on farms and owned assets. So it wasn't that 70% were entrepreneurs. Everyone wanted to own assets because they understood that that created all kinds of advantages in that world, right? It allowed you to give something to your descendants. It allowed you to work together as a family. It allowed you to do all the things Chris is describing about, being productive. And it also creates this integrated whole in terms of family life. And so I just I don't have any interest. And I think another big part of it is it actually disciples men. I think that what, Chris is saying is when you're serving another man's vision and you've made that, I think getting a job temporarily is completely fine. But when it's your long-term strategy for providing for your family, like you're like, I hope 10, 20, 30 years from now, I'm also only making money for my family through an employment situation. That's what I really feel like is strange historically and just oftentimes just unwise. And part of it is your own discipleship as a man. I want to see how you respond to the challenges of actually owning something and trying to steward it. Because if the call is to be fruitful, multiply, fill, subdue, and rule, you need to have access to something that you're doing that through, and you're doing that with your own children. But I think that the primary way that God begins to really disciple a young man is also through his ability to steward and acquire assets. And like I said, that could just be a percentage of your income. It doesn't have to be all your income. You can get some income through employment. I think that's totally legitimate. It's just the long-term trajectory should be asset development. And so I just feel like we have handicapped people. And part of this is that God's a good father, and when he brought the Israelites into the promised land, he gave every single one of them assets. Every one of them, every single family owned land, even all the Levites. Like some people get confused and they think priests and Levites, maybe they were the exception. They were sort of the clergy of the Old Testament. No, read it more carefully. Every single priestly household owned land, every single Levitical household owned land. The only thing that was different about the Levites and the other 11 tribes were the Levites didn't own an allotment of land that was exclusively theirs in terms of a land mass. They got cities and pasture lands, and that's described in detail in the book of Joshua when Joshua allocated land to the Levites. So anyway, I think we just have a really distorted picture of what normal family life should look like. And we believe that part of that is asset building. So we want to make sure that during this phase, you could be stuck in this phase for many years. And when a father is in this phase, we want to be really careful not to put a lot of pressure on that father to do tons and tons of productive ministry activity before their business gets to a place of more stability. And so we're coaching each other. We're talking about how to do that. And we think we need to be really active in supporting each other in that process. But I would say this is a really different distinctive. And part of this is, you guys, I just, when you turn it, a lot of the long-term thinking, when you get into your 50s and 60s as a father, and you have to ask your employer for time to spend time with your grandchildren, I just think there's something fundamentally flawed about this idea of fatherhood. No, like that, you shouldn't want that for your future. That doesn't mean you won't necessarily be bearing lots of heavy responsibilities during that period, but they should be under the rule of your household. Like that should be your goal. And I want that to be the goal of the city partners, that they're able to decide in your 50s how much time you're going to spend working with your adult children versus how much time you're going to spend doing ministry, and that's not being basically determined by an HR department somewhere. I just that idea, I find it just really grates on the idea of having a household centric life. But this has cost 1KH immensely in terms of our own, ability to sort of scale up quickly because we can only like grow at the speed of the father's maturity and the father's asset building ability. And so we're trying to just track with that. And if that takes many more decades, then we're gonna go through a much slower process. We're okay with that. We want to build on a really solid foundation.